Welcome to Season 3, Episode 4 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm going to share some thoughts on what I learned from quitting teaching twice. Visit Truth for Teachers to get the transcript, links to recommended resources, and share your thoughts on the show. I know that some of you right now are barely making it through this year, and you're so dreading the return to school the following morning that you can't even enjoy your evenings. The idea of going back to that place just makes you sick to your stomach. You want to quit more than anything, but you have no idea what the alternative would be. I get it. I've been in your shoes. Others of you still love teaching, but you're feeling an itch to do something different. You want to make a greater impact for kids, or you want a more flexible schedule, or you just feel like there's something more out there for you. I've been in that position too. You see, I've quit teaching twice. Once because the school environment was so toxic that I hated my job, and once because I wanted to shift into a different role in education. I'll share both of those stories briefly with you today and share 5 things I learned that might be helpful to you if you're thinking about quitting for either reason. So it was just over 10 years ago when I quit my teaching job mid-year. It was during my 6th year of teaching, and it was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. My administrators were blindsided by the decision. After all, I was an experienced teacher with multiple years in urban schools, and I had a good handle on my classroom. My students were learning, their benchmark test scores showed strong gains. The kids liked me, their parents liked me. Things seemed to be fine. But what people didn't know was that it took everything out of me to keep it that way. I had just moved to the state and I had no idea what to expect in my new school. I was disappointed to learn that most of my second graders were reading on a late kindergarten level, and the pressure to get them up to speed was weighing very heavily on me. We had no windows in our classroom, and we weren't allowed to have recess or any break at all during the day, and that was per a district mandate. So I was stuck in this tiny, dark classroom with a very large class of very energetic 7-year-olds and zero outlet for all their energy. Beyond our 4 walls, the school's atmosphere was in total chaos. We couldn't send students to the bathroom alone, as there had been instances of both girls and boys being raped there by other students. One of my kids found a knife on the ground on our way to lunch. An off-duty police officer and a drill sergeant were hired to help control the students in the cafeteria. One of them would bend over and scream in the children's faces, while the other marched up and down the center aisle, yelling into a microphone as the kids threw food around his head. Not exactly a fun working and learning environment. Things were quite a bit calmer in my classroom, but student behavior still posed a huge problem. Getting the kids to respond appropriately to even the smallest request took Herculean first day of school type of efforts for me. It was like the movie Groundhog Day. We practiced the same basic routines and procedures over and over and over again. And 3/4 of the class just wasn't internalizing anything. I was managing the classroom. I was maintaining some sense of order, but I wasn't teaching. I wanted to have deep conversations with my students about current events. I wanted to delve into books with them and watch their eyes light up when they made connections between the text and their own lives. I wanted to see them develop a sense of curiosity and wonder about the world through investigations and science. I wanted to teach. But by the 2nd quarter of the school year, the kids still weren't anywhere near ready for those things. And so I was still spending the entire day disciplining students and teaching them basic work habits and socio-emotional skills, alone, without support, in a chaotic, unsafe school where neither their needs nor mine were being met. I hit a breaking point where I realized that my job was just not worth the energy expenditure that I had to put out every day. I realized that I was up against too many obstacles. Most of them were out of my control and insurmountable. Things were just not going to improve significantly, and I was going to go home exhausted every single day because the school culture was so toxic. And yet, the guilt that I felt over even thinking about quitting was indescribable. Was I really willing to abandon such a needy group of children in the middle of the year? What kind of person would give up on those kids and look for an easier job just so her own life could be more comfortable? I felt selfish. I felt like a hypocrite. I felt like a failure as a teacher. My principal was absolutely furious at me for putting her in such a difficult decision. But even worse was the unexpected reaction of my students when I told them I was quitting. I thought they'd be devastated, but most of the kids barely even blinked when I told them Friday would be my last day. Part of their nonchalance was because of their young age, but I realized with a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach that they were so used to losing teachers and other important adults in their lives on just a moment's notice like this, that this was just par for the course for them. I got hugs and letters and a few tears on the last day, but the majority of the class was so wrapped up in their own issues that they weren't even thinking about me. 5 minutes before the final bell rang, 2 of my toughest kids got into a physical altercation over an eraser that one of them had thrown. And I was so busy dealing with them and school security that there was no opportunity to have wistful goodbyes. My time at that school ended just as chaotically as it has started. My decision to quit in the middle of the year would have been much tougher if I had decided to leave the field altogether. But at that point, I knew I wasn't done with teaching. And within a day of making my decision to quit, I had an interview in a neighboring district, and I was hired on the spot. I realize that's not the norm. But maybe you can relate to this part. The hope that in a different school, the love of teaching would return. I can tell you without a doubt that it did. My new school had its problems, of course, but I felt safe there, and my students were safe. And I was able to really teach again. I stayed in the classroom for another 5 years. I even moved back to another urban high-poverty school for the last 2 years of my time as a teacher. Urban teaching is where my heart has always been and will always be. So don't get me wrong, this is nothing about high-poverty schools. If you have the right leadership and the right school culture, as I did at the start of my teaching career and in those final 2 years in the classroom, the quality of teaching and learning can be exceptional. And urban schools can be fantastic places to work. But it was right when I had moved to that last school that I published my first book for teachers. It's called The Cornerstone: Classroom Management that Makes Teaching More Effective, Efficient, and Enjoyable. I had been sharing ideas on my website for years, and my readers encouraged me to compile everything together and write a book. So I did, and then I started getting professional development requests based on the book. I remember the very first PD that I did. It was for a charter school locally in Fort Lauderdale. I spent the morning doing a workshop and then the afternoon meeting with individual teachers in their classrooms, coaching them and helping them apply what I'd shared in the PD to their unique teaching situations. And one new teacher I sat with just poured her heart out to me. She actually cried as we sat there and talked because she was so grateful to have someone who cared and who understood her situation. And that day, I was absolutely hooked on coaching and mentoring teachers. I knew in my heart that for at least a time, I wanted to focus on teaching teachers instead of teaching kids. It was a brand new challenge that excited me in a way that teaching children hadn't done for a while, to be perfectly honest. And it was rewarding in a completely different way. I had been impacting 25 kids a year in my classroom, but just with this one PD day, I was impacting an entire school full of kids. And I was changing how their teachers taught every class in the future. And I knew both from the reaction of the teachers that I just coached and also from some uninspiring PD experiences I had had myself, that the need for instructional coaches who really know and really understand teachers is incredibly great. teachers need someone in their corner. And I wanted to do that beyond just through my website. I wanted to make supporting teachers my number one job. So I stayed in the classroom one more year while I planned my next steps. And I also got married to my husband, who was living and working in New York. So I moved from Florida to New York to be with him, and I took on part-time instructional coaching role in the city. I was blessed with the opportunity to not only create change in education on a larger scale, but encourage and inspire my fellow teachers who were so very tired and discouraged. And I was able to make more money, and I was able to have a more flexible schedule. So as bittersweet and as scary as it was to leave the classroom, I truly have never looked back. I miss the kids, but I know there's absolutely no way that I could do what I'm doing right now, with coaching teachers in the 40-hour Teacher Workweek Club, supporting teachers through the blog, the podcast, the books I'm writing, the professional development, the school-based work, the speaking. I could not be doing all this if I was still in the classroom. Some people manage to do it all. I don't know how. There's no way I personally could have done everything well. My family life, my health would have suffered, and my students would have suffered because they wouldn't have been my number one work priority anymore. I knew it was the right time for me to move on to my role as an instructional coach and educational consultant. And once again, I have a piece about my decision to quit my teaching job. So those are my two experiences with quitting. Once in order to find a different teaching position, and once to pursue a different role in education. If you're considering quitting, I hope it's helpful to know that you're not the only one facing the transition and to know that someone else has been through this. Here are a couple of things that I've learned along the way that might be helpful for you. First of all, I think it's important to know that sometimes the school year does not get easier over time. And that's not necessarily your fault. Usually, I found that teaching becomes less stressful as the year progresses because students get the routines and they make more and more academic progress. Occasionally, though, this was not true for me, and it's not true for all the other teachers that I know. Sometimes the class is just a really difficult one, and your stress level's not going to improve until the following year when you have a different group. Sometimes the school environment is toxic, and you don't have the support you need. If you're feeling like quitting because every single day with your students is a struggle and you haven't experienced that in past years, please know that just about every teacher eventually has that class or teaches in that school. And don't blame yourself for how difficult the job has been. Some years, some classes, some schools are just more challenging than others. It doesn't always get easier. Secondly, it's not your imagination. Teaching is getting harder. Our students are coming to school with more and more problems, and the bar for achievement is continually being raised. More things are added to teachers' plates every year, and rarely is anything ever removed. The job is taking more and more out of you, and so there's an even greater need for support roles in education. Non-classroom-based jobs that help meet the growing demands that are being placed on teachers and kids. Thirdly, you're not a bad teacher just because your job feels too hard. Even the best teachers get put in situations that are physically and mentally exhausting. Feeling like you want to quit does not mean that you were not cut out for the job or you're a bad person. The position that you're in just might not be the best one for you. Or you may just be having an exceptionally tough year. Fourthly, quitting does not equal failure. When I quit my teaching job mid-year at that toxic work environment, I struggled with the decision to quit long after I'd left the job because I felt like I had abandoned the kids who needed me the most. I had to remind myself over and over, it's not that I couldn't do the job. It's that I chose not to for my own mental well-being and my physical health. I was not a failure. I was successful in taking care of myself. I have many other responsibilities in life in addition to being a teacher. I was not willing to let all those other areas fall apart because of my job. Quitting does not equal failure. And finally, I learned there are a lot of different ways to use your talents and gifts to help children. Many teachers who quit still have a deep desire to work with kids and make a difference in their lives. There are many, many ways to do that. Your career as an educator does not have to be over simply because you don't want to stay where you're at. When I left the classroom in 2009, I knew I had the chance to make a difference on a larger scale. It's hard to see that sometimes as a teacher because there's not many promotion opportunities within the average school. But if you think outside the box, there are ways to stay in education without being in the classroom. Now, to be clear, I am not telling you to quit your job. Quitting is not always the right decision. In fact, there were plenty of other low points in my teaching career over those 11 years in which I wanted to walk away, but didn't. During those times, I found I was frustrated in the moment, but I knew in my heart that things would get better. I knew that an overbearing principal would transfer to another school, and he did. I knew that the transition to a new curriculum would be for the best, and I would learn it. And it was for the best, and I did learn it. Another time, I knew I could make it through just a few more months with an exasperating parent or a frustrating student, and I did. One of the best things about teaching is that every fall is a new start. And sometimes the best thing to do is to hold on till then. But for those of you who have emailed asking me whether to quit your job or teach on, and there have been hundreds of those emails over the years, I continue to say, do what you know is best for yourself. If you're not sure, keep teaching and form a good game plan. Hang in there as long as you can. Read Awakened, Change Your Mindset to Transform Your Teaching. That's my book about how to perceive stress differently. Or read Unshakable, 20 Ways to Enjoy Teaching Every Day No Matter What. That will give you ideas for infusing your school day with meaning and purpose and joy. Or join the 40-Hour Teacher Workweek Club and get productivity hacks to help you achieve balance in your life. And then if and when you hit that breaking point where your gut feeling is to go and the reasons to leave truly outweigh the reasons to stay, you will know. And you should trust that knowing within yourself. You'll hear many voices in the school system telling you to prioritize your work, or more accurately, to prioritize your students' test scores. But it will be far less often that you hear the message to prioritize your health and well-being. Prioritize your lifestyle and your family goals. Prioritize your professional aspirations, either within education or outside of it. I'm telling you that today. You have an obligation to your students, sure, but you have an even bigger obligation to yourself to create a life that you want to live. Living your best life might mean finding another job, or it might mean staying and developing different coping strategies for stress. But my advice is to do whatever it takes to pursue your dreams and aspirations, both professionally and personally. You deserve that. I want to leave you with a motivational quote for the week ahead that I call the takeaway truth. And it's this: winners quit all the time. They just quit the right stuff at the right time. That's from Seth Godin. You see, there's no shame in quitting. Choosing to say no to one thing will leave space in your life to say yes to something else. I would love for you to share your thoughts and your questions on this topic. Go to thecornerstoneforteachers.com/S3EP4. That's season 3, EP4, and leave your comments there. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this was helpful to those of you who are ready for a change and just not sure where to go from here. I'm looking forward to hearing from you about the episode. Have a fantastic week. You can do this. And remember, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it. Truth for Teachers is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. For more great podcast recommendations, go to edupodcastnetwork.com. That's edupodcastnetwork.com.